Welcome to the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission of November 12th. It is 6:03. We'll start with a roll call. We have two members absent, Commissioners Wilson and Commissioner Morrow, as well as Councilmember Jim Wiesner is absent. The remaining, Commissioner Gore, Chair Engelbrett, Commissioner Bradley, and Commissioner Fry are present. So our next item on the agenda is the approval of our October 22nd, 2024 minutes. So I'll give you all a minute to look through those if you haven't already. And if there are any changes, let me know. If there aren't, I'll take a motion. Go for it. Yep.
I make a motion that we accept the minutes as written.
Second.
Okay. Moved by Gore, second by Bradley. All those in favor? Passes unanimously. Okay. Our next item is our public comment. So during this time, citizens may comment on subjects of interest, not on the agenda or on agenda items. To ensure your comments are recorded properly, please state your name clearly. Individual comments will be limited to 3 minutes to ensure maximum participation during this 15-minute time. You may also comment online at www.oakharbor.gov/public comment at least 2 days in advance of the Planning Commission meeting. It does not look like we have anyone in the audience, and there is let's wait till member comments. Sorry. Doesn't look like we have anyone in the room, and we did not receive any public comments online. So if there's anyone out there going once, going twice, 3 times, moving on. All right, we do not have any public hearings scheduled for tonight, and so we will move on to our discussion items, the first one being our 2025 major update of the comprehensive plan presented by our principal planner, Kat Kamak.
Hello, good evening, Kat Kamak, principal planner. Excuse me. Excuse me. I have a really short presentation on the survey results that we have received, the first survey results we've received on the comprehensive plan. I'll go through some slides that the consultant has provided us. The consultant will be at the City Council workshop on next week on Wednesday, the 20th. They'll be presenting this information. They were unable to be here today, so I will use their slides and present the information. So with that, I will get started. So what we are going to cover today is basically a few comments on the community engagement overview that we're undertaking with the comp plan, our first community-wide survey results, and if you remember, we also had our first OakPack meeting, and in that meeting, we provided information to the OakPack team and had some discussion, and all of this material is in your packet, the summary and the full survey responses for your consumption. But what I'll do is just share what we have in terms of the results, the overall results, and then we can open it up for discussion. So this is basically our engagement overview. We're doing data collection and analysis that has been mostly done for our existing conditions. We're working on the survey. We have a project website. We have OakPack meetings. We have stakeholder interviews. This is all the work that we're currently undertaking. Simultaneously, we're discussing policy issues with the Planning Commission and City Council as we move forward. So I can see a cycle here where we hit the planning commission with discussions almost every month, following it up with the city council workshops. But interspaced between all of this is our community engagement processes, and we'll be bringing that information to the planning commission and try to feed it into the process. This is just to give you a refresher on the timeline. We are in the fall 2024 segment. Therefore, we're working on our second OPAC meeting. We're going through our survey results. We're still working with the county on our UGA planning issues. We're also looking at all our policies in our existing comprehensive plan to see what needs updates. So all of this work is currently ongoing. So the first community-wide survey results. The major goal of this first survey was to gather information on existing conditions, what people feel about the existing conditions in Oak Harbor, what do they think about the future growth, just kind of gauge attitudes, and also collect some climate-related information because we're adding that climate sub-element to our comprehensive plan. We need to engage the community on that. So those were the kind of three aspects that this initial survey was focusing on. We received about 308 surveys, and we have all of the information in your packet, all the detailed demographics and all the question responses. You can see from that data, and I don't have a graph of that, about 234 respondents of the 308 said they lived in Oak Harbor. So that's a fairly good percentage of people that responded from Oak Harbor. Initially, my knee-jerk reaction was, should we even consider all the people that responded that are not from Oak Harbor? And after a little bit of thought, I thought, yes, that we should include them because we do take input from people who live in the county and shop in Oak Harbor or come for tourist way. And we want to take all their input because that all is reflective of our community, and we'd like to get that feedback. So I think it's okay. Initially, I was like, well, that's a lot of people outside, but it does matter when we want to take input and consider how we want to change our community. So from the demographics, we see that the highest age group that responded to our population was between 45 and 54. There was the income level of the majority of the respondents were 100,000 and higher. If you look at the distribution between the male-female respondents, we had more female respondents than male. And we also identified that most of the respondents lived in the Swantown and Fort Nugent area. So interesting kind of statistics. I mean, we can't force people to take surveys, but that is kind of the cross-section of the demographics of the people that responded to the survey. Now, how does this compare to the actual demographics of Oak Harbor? We wanted to just see what kind of comparison or how far are we apart. So the median age for Oak Harbor is 31.7. Of course, all the survey respondents were fairly in the higher age bracket. Median household income is $68,000 in Oak Harbor, whereas the income was reported at $100,000 greater. So there's a question on whether we got the good balance in terms of income level responses. And as I mentioned, those higher responses from the female than the males. And the highest populated neighborhood is actually the Broadview neighborhood, but we got more respondents from Swantown, Fort Nugent. This is just the reality of the surveys and how they come about. How we use this data moving forward into our policy is yet to be determined because this is just information for us. We can glean some takeaways from it, but as we get more into the policy discussion or as we get further into the comprehensive plan and we have some challenges, we can refer back to some of these surveys to say, okay, people thought this on this issue more so than they thought on this issue. So this information will continue to help us as we develop the comp plan. It's not a one-time, this is what we got out of the surveys and we should go for it. So that's kind of how we're viewing it, because there were 3 open-ended questions and there were 300 responses for all of them. and they're all polarizing, it's hard to say this is all the, the only takeaway. So you kind of have to kind of weigh this information based on the issues that rise with our policy discussion. So one of the questions was, what are the most important areas for the city to focus on? And this is, again, it's average, and the detailed responses are included in your packet. As you can see, people think that the city should focus on public safety and emergency response. And if you compare it to the comments, you saw a lot of concerns on homeless population and the resulting consequences and symptoms of that. So I think maybe that plays a lot into people's responses when they answer the survey. Sidewalks, roads, utilities, and other infrastructure. Infrastructure was definitely one of the bigger topics of conversation in all the comments. That's something that came up here as well. Businesses and jobs, that's always a concern. Economy, the council always discusses that, and it's of concern. And then comes housing and outdoor recreation and other opportunities for community events. So I'll point out later in some of the responses how some of these kind of changed. When we have a structured question, people answer in certain ways, and then when we get into the open-ended questions, people answer in different ways. And it's really hard to tell what people are thinking and what rises to the top when they answer these questions. But nonetheless, like I said, we don't have definite takeaways from these surveys, but these will be continuing information that'll help us that'll help us with the policies later on. One of the questions we asked was what types of amenities would they like to see more of in Oak Harbor? And of course, neighborhood commercial and businesses and coffee shops, and some of these small businesses are what people seem to envision for the community. And community facilities, recreation centers, outdoor recreation, and waterfront facilities. These are some of the things that also rank pretty high with the residents. This is a very rough approximation of the 300 or so responses we got. We as staff, I engaged all our staff members to read the responses and provide their input to me. And everybody had different takes on it. And I think, and at the end of this, my presentation, I'm happy to hear what the Planning Commission thinks of all the responses, because everybody saw things in a little different way. But this is a very gross simplification of the 300 responses. All the bigger and larger words were topics that people mentioned more often in their comments. And of course, housing was one of the bigger concerns of statements made, and people saw that as one of the greater opportunities in terms of more housing. They definitely saw waterfront and the downtown as areas for opportunities for development. Again, the subject matter that people covered in this was vast, but this is a very gross simplifications of those answers. But as we go, like I said, through the document, we may refer back to these comments to see what people said related to certain issues. Same thing for the challenges. Again, these questions were back-to-back opportunities. What are the opportunities and what are the challenges? And normally in the planning field, we see all the areas that are usually opportunities are also areas of challenges. And that's kind of how the planning field is. Areas of regulation initially face scrutiny and opposition, but over the years they develop and become better redevelopment areas. It's just how the nature of the business is. So housing, as much as they noticed that was an opportunity, is also recognized as a challenge. And of course, there was a lot of comments on infrastructure, traffic, and concerns on all of those utilities that serve the population. So we could see the polarizing comments between the part of the community that wants to hold to that small town feel and the feel for Oak Harbor, and then there's also the community that knows that we have to deal with change and population growth and housing challenges, and we have to incorporate these changes in the community. So we can see that Oak Harbor is in that kind of crossroads where they're trying to, recognize their identity as they are changing and accommodating the future. So we had a couple questions in there about neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods are in the comprehensive plan, and they were introduced into the comprehensive plan in 2016. They were very rudimentary idea, but they're slowly starting to take shape as we go into this comp plan process, and asking people to look at this map, looking and trying to envision where they see opportunities. And so, people, of course, saw opportunity in downtown, which is what the Old Town neighborhood is. But it was also surprising to see that people also saw development potential in terms of housing in the Fort Nugent and the Swantown neighborhoods as well. My guess is that people probably are thinking that those areas also have large enough lots to accommodate those type of developments. Where do they see opportunities? Again, Ottfield was recognized as one of the as the areas for opportunities, and of course this is the area where we have the most industrial land, and therefore the likelihood of seeing a lot of change in jobs and economy in this region is definitely desirable for the city. We also had to get some community input on climate-related information because of the inclusion of a new element for that. And so this is some of the standard questions that the state has related to the climate element update. So we've included that to gauge the community's concerns. And as suspected, wildfires are among one of the higher climate change concerns that people view. And this seems to be fairly new, I think, in Western Washington. I want to say in the last decade, 5 years or so, 5 years to a decade, where we've been seeing more fires in Western Washington. And the climate change, and people do feel that it's getting hotter and drier in the West, and therefore some of these concerns are starting to become bigger and more imposing. Drought, of course, is a common climate concern. We get our water from the Skagit River through Anacortes supplies us that water. However, we know that there have been seasons where the Skagit River is running low, and we do have some restrictions on water use and so on. So these are all concerns that the community does have. In terms of climate change, there was a question in terms of what assets should be prioritized, and of course infrastructure is ranked fairly high along with roads. Roads and infrastructure are somewhat the same kind of umbrella, so definitely people are concerned that we should spend extra effort in making sure that our infrastructure and road network is pretty solid in the long run for to deal with these type of hazards. And then buildings and parks and historic structures come after that, and you can see the big difference in how much people think that the infrastructure and the roads are important, and the rest of it is, I wouldn't say not as important, but probably redevelopable or some way of a way to kind of turn over those, whereas infrastructure and roads seem to be of high concern in terms of maintaining those in a sustainable way. One of the questions that was included is what kind of habitual changes people are willing to make in order to contribute towards, making impacts on climate-related changes. And it's interesting to see that recycling, supporting local economy, and renovating homes for energy efficiency. I mean, that forms more than 50% of people's behavior, which is, I categorize those all as very economy driven, so to speak. The reduce of fossil fuels, I mean, that could be done in different ways, but less people willing to make compromises on that. The work from home percentage is increasing. I think that people feel working from home does contribute towards lesser use of fossil fuels and resources and so on. And so that seems to be taking more and more of a mainstream idea in the recent times. And some of the others, like carpooling, et cetera, are still pretty low in terms of how people want to make change, just because maybe the current pattern is very difficult to change, or it's difficult for people in the current pattern to envision a different pattern. If people are working currently at the base and they're driving from different places, it's hard to envision the carpool scenarios unless it's organized for them to make that change. So maybe with more housing here in Oak Harbor, there's less driving, and then that whole pattern of carpooling can change to local transit and local bikes and networks and so on and so forth. But anyway, currently, this is kind of reflective of what people are willing to consider changing themselves. So that was the survey results, just kind of the summary of it. I'll quickly jump into the OAKPAC meeting and hit the some of the findings and discussions there, and then we can open it up for discussion. So the first OAKPAC meeting had several agencies involved in it. We did send invitations to about 40 to 45 agencies, and not all of them were able to attend, but at least we had representatives at WashDOT, Habitat for Humanity, the Naval Air Station representative was there. We had Island County staff. There were people from the Builders Association, and of course Oak Harbor staff from various departments were also there. So there was a housing discussion at the OAKPAC meeting, and questions such as, what do you see Oak Harbor look like in 20 years? What should change and what should be the same? So these were some of the discussions that were had at the OAKPAC meeting. And of course, the challenges and opportunity question was also placed here, and traffic affordability, impacts to services. These were all identified as challenges. And of course, transit options and funding for new opportunity and economic growth were viewed as opportunities. And these are similar to how the community surveys turned out as well. These were some kind of statements that we got regarding the opportunities and challenges portion that we wanted to highlight. Some of the opportunities that people identified was creating partnership for long-term solutions, and being able to create a diverse city, which is a great thing to plan for. And of course, the waterfront is a unique asset. Everybody recognizes that as one of the prime assets for Oak Harbor, and development and redevelopment efforts, and that will continue to provide benefits to Oak Harbor. Some of the challenges that people saw was, again, housing, cost of developing affordable housing. You can see probably 3 or 4 of them are related to housing. Cost of construction and maintaining affordable housing. There were thoughts brought up on SR20, the idea of it being a connector, find ways to make SR20 a connector as opposed to a barrier. And I think hopefully with that 2027 project, when the state comes in to design the highway, these are some of the things, looking at our active transportation plan and some of the other things that we will come up between now and then to inform WashDOT that we'd like to see the highway designed through Oak Harbor as a connector as opposed to a separator. So these small things, but these way big in the design of these projects. And again, navigating the culture shift in a growing population, adjusting a bigger sized city. I think again, the polarizing thoughts of, trying to stay a small town city, but, but have that big city services. I think that's kind of the balance that Oak Harbor's always been trying to fight, to balance. So, notes from our housing discussion, public and private partnerships for housing development and trying to identify funding for these is something that's has come up several times as a way to move forward. Again, balancing between new housing market options and existing housing patterns. So there's Oak Harbor has a distinct housing pattern with the single-family development that it has and the type of sizes of the lots that we have created. So balancing that with the demand for new housing, the size of housing, the type of housing is a challenge. And so people identify that as definitely a challenge and how to balance that. Exploring incentives for providing new housing that's comparable for Oak Harbor, and also exploring options to manage rental and long-term rentals. I think the rental market, housing people were concerned about how to keep the rent affordable and how to manage it and how it doesn't keep increasing as the time goes. What are strategies to do that? So these were all ideas and concerns and topics that came up at the OACPAC meeting. Again, understanding the local workforce conditions and the potential impacts of the community. And there was thoughts on, do we have the labor? Do we have the education facilities? Can we make that happen? So good points for discussion. Building partnership with schools involving younger population as into the community planning. In 2016, there was a lot of concern, and it's also come across in the surveys in terms of how to keep the population that grew up here staying here. And I think providing more opportunities and providing more housing options will give those folks a choice. Currently, people feel like they have to leave. They have to get out of here to do something, and it doesn't have to be the case. And I think that was identified in 2016 and also in some of the survey responses this time around as well. Again, increase, we heard about childcare and the lack of those services and how those should also be considered in the growth of the city. And of course, to develop and foster the relationship with the naval base and see what opportunities and partnerships we can do to improve the community with them. So these were all some of the topics that came up at the OACPAC discussion. So we have coming forward or in the month of December, January, we'll probably be planning for a second OACPAC meeting. We'll also be planning, now that we have the first survey results, we'll be working on our existing policies and identifying the gaps that we have in our existing policies. And then we'll be doing a second survey. So first survey results, gap in the policies, hopefully discussions with the county on UGA so we can form our second questionnaire, maybe to get some responses from the community that will help us in some of these directions moving forward. So we will continue to be working on those aspects. In terms of what we're working with the county, the city council does not have a workshop in December, and I think the planning commission's meeting is also early in December. And we have some late meetings with the county in December, so I'm not sure we'll be prepared for discussions at the December meeting. Nothing will be ripe yet, so we'll be moving a lot of it into January of next year. However, we're hoping that a lot of our internal work, preparation for the survey, et cetera, can be done during December. So we have our plates full. We have a lot of work done. There's a lot of moving parts still in our comprehensive plan. we have a lot of things going on. But anyway, I would like to open the floor up for any discussions or questions that the planning commission have, or any thoughts you may have on all of the responses that we received. I'd be happy to hear what the commission thought in terms of responses, or some of the things that you think were, identified, or which jumps out at you as something that's notable or you'd like to know. So with that, I'll turn it over to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? All right, why don't why don't you start?
CAC, thanks for coming, and I appreciate it, and nice brief. I have 3 things I just want to run past you so I get a little better clarification. The survey, you said, is going to be used more later down the road if you need to come back to it, but the survey should be used to develop the comp plan since it's what the public wants. So I really think that we ought to take serious those conversations, because everybody's got the opportunity to give input. So if you don't give input, then you're going to take what everybody gives you, right? I mean, it's kind of what we're left with. And so looking at that, I would think that we would need to listen to what they have to say in that development, not come back to it later, but use that as a building block. Just my suggestion. Next is the mean income. It's almost half of the average $100,000 income reported in that brief. To me, I would think that we really need to build to that medium as well as the high, but if the mean income is $63K, we got to make sure we have plenty of houses available for the $63K, right? And less, but also for the $100K. But since our mean average is 63, that's kind of where we need to focus. Am I wrong? I'm trying to just understand.
No, that's our median. Our AMI is based on that. Our average median income housing. So the housing HAP tool, the allocations that we have with the county, the 5,000 units that have been allocated to the city, they come in income ranges. So they come in, we need this many units in 0 to 30 AMI, 30 to 50 AMI, and 50 to 80 AMI. So that distribution is based on the Oak Harbor's, or actually Island County's, average median income.
Okay, so what was the 100,000?
The 100,000 is what the survey respondents, so in the survey, the people that responded to the survey, of all the people that responded to the survey, there was X percentage of people, I don't have the sheets in front of me, there's X percentage of people, or more percentage of people that answered the survey made $100,000 or more.
And then the mean average was 63,000?
That was just
surveys.
Comparison to our actual demographic data.
Okay, never mind, that answered that question.
Yeah.
And then everybody talks about the waterfront, right? So with the waterfront, and they say a need to improve, but the majority of that waterfront is owned by private citizens who rent to businesses. Are they talking about trying to more beautify the downtown? Because that's going to take the owners of those buildings to do. Buying art and throwing it in front of old historic buildings doesn't change what the insides look like, or who's renting, or how much the rent is. So I'm kind of curious, what are they wanting to see improve on the waterfront?
So I would think actually that most of Oak Harbor's waterfront is public, actually. I mean, you take the marina, you take Pioneer Way, you take Bayshore Drive, you take Flintstone Park, you take Windjammer Park, all of that is waterfront. And I'm guessing that when they say waterfront development, they're talking about developing the actual how people interact with the waterfront, whether it's walking or whether it's trails or that type of development. Now, downtown development, and that is also an important factor for people, but I think they classify that as downtown or Old Town. But I think when they say waterfront, I'm guessing that they mean the waterfront that we have with the shore, which means Windjammer Park and the trails and so on.
And see, I took it as downtown as well because they talk about bringing in more business. Excuse me. So that business isn't going to go in at the park for the public
Yeah, yeah.
parks. It's going to go in where there's businesses.
Absolutely.
And the empty stalls and stuff like that. So that's the way I'm taking it from what the public says, is they want to see the business side of it brought up to speed with more businesses downtown. How do we make that happen? I don't know that we can, because those buildings are owned by private people, not the city. So I don't know how we make that happen, but
Yeah.
Well, unless you are, sorry, and are they talking about, when you say waterfront, obviously you can put trails and things that people can walk on, but are they talking about where we used to have a pier long ago, maybe redeveloping that is a type of way to develop the waterfront? Could that be what they're talking about?
It definitely could be. That's the thing. It's like everybody sees different things. There are mentions of the waterfront development. There's mention of the pier development, rebuilding the pier. So these are all ideas that are in the plan, right? I mean, there may be 3 people who mention the pier, maybe not 70 people, but 3 people. But, you know, when people read it, what sounds like what idea sounds like it's going to most work? Even if it's one idea, sometime one person making an idea, that idea may still carry a lot of weight, even if, you know. So I would say, like, from all that's why I was saying I would love to say that 80% of the people said this, therefore, you know, but we don't have that consensus nearly looking at this, at the data. We have economy definitely in the forefront, utilities and infrastructure investment definitely in the forefront. We have housing that's definitely in the forefront, and then we hear a lot about waterfront development, which could be inclusive of the downtown as well. Again, different people think of it differently. You may, again, as you mentioned, when you think of waterfront, you think of all the buildings. When somebody else thinks of waterfront, when I'm thinking of waterfront, I'm thinking of it differently. So when people make comments, they're envisioning so many things differently that we have to, you know, try and pull policy clues out of what they're trying to say.
thanks, CAC. I'll yield back.
Okay, so,
No, I am. I did some research on the history of Oak Harbor. This is for kids 3 years back. And we have an actual path, trail, whatever you want to call it, that goes all the way from Scenic Heights, where there is a lovely history bit of information, which includes the previous residents here. And that trail, if you follow it and you go on sidewalks and the like for Windjammer and Pioneer, if we could go around on the Navy base onto Mailer Point, you have the whole history of Oak Harbor. And when they say Old Town, there's the downtown. Strictly speaking, that's not Old Town. Old Town is the part from Midway on over to Regatta, etc., which used to be part of downtown but burned in 1921. And when they redeveloped, they said, okay, this is going to be housing, not shops. And so we are still very tied to the past, but most people don't really know it. And it seems to me that it's something we could definitely take advantage of. Nobody around here has exactly that. And the pier with Mailer Store at the end, that's historic. So whoever was mentioning that was talking about not recent history, but history 100 years ago and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there have been, over the years, since I've been here, several attempts to try and bring back that pier. There was even at one time, I think when I just got here in the mid-2000s, there was actually money, federal grant money, to study and do an engineering project on actually bringing back that pier. However, the council at that time, I think, in considering a conditional use permit for upland improvements at Flintstone Park, so the idea was that this dock would restore not only the historical aspect of the dock, but it would also be a passenger ferry type receiving passenger ferry. So they wanted to have upland improvements, ticketing, whatever it is that people, when they come, on land, what a community event, some cafeteria, something like that. So there was a proposal to do a conditional use permit for a building at Keystone Park, and the council at that time were approving or in charge of approving the shoreline permit, conditional shoreline permit. And there was a large number of people that opposed that project from the people that live right by the Keystone Park. And so that project eventually did not make it through, and that funding had to be returned to the federal. So, but this is just old history. So there have been several attempts to try and do things. There's always been interest in the waterfront development. I don't think I don't want to say this, but out of sounding too skeptical, I haven't seen any new ideas actually in any of the comments. We're trying to make a lot of the existing good ideas still happen. Not that the ideas were bad, that the timeliness was probably not good when that decision came up. So these are all good decisions. They have come up year after year, or comp plan update after update, but the timing of how they come up and the opportunity and the people here to make the decisions, they all need to kind of come together in order for it to work. So again, you keep trying to do the things, make sure that the timing is working, there's funding opportunities. I think there was a question that was asked, I think, by City Council, or maybe the Planning Commission a little while ago, is like, what are we doing different? I think with the downtown and any redevelopment in downtown, everybody wants to see downtown redevelop, everybody wants to see something happen. And currently the city has a couple properties, right, the corner properties. So somebody was asking, what is the difference? What can be the difference maker this time? With all the changes proposed every time, what can be the difference? And I think maybe those two properties could be a difference maker if they could be a spark. Today, the city did not have any properties in downtown or could not spark anything by itself. Did Pioneer Way project, that was a public project. There was some public investments. We got a couple new buildings since Pioneer Way has been built. Actually, we haven't gotten too many new buildings close to City Beach Street. We got a couple new buildings that were built, and hopefully we'll see a few more new buildings. So the city has made investments in public infrastructure in downtown. We want to see private property owners reciprocate that investment with investment in their private properties, but that still hasn't happened. So we still have to keep fueling our public investment till we spur that private investment to happen, and therefore get the return for all the public investment dollars that you put in. So we're continually trying to make that effort in downtown so that we can have a private property owners invest in their properties as well.
Yeah, one more. So earlier you said that in doing the survey, depending on how you ask the question, you get different responses. And you can see that on the two questions. When you look at the first graph, what is most important for the city to focus on? Obviously, infrastructure, public safety, emergency response is right at the top of the list. But then when you look at the next one, what amenities would you like to see more of in the city? Infrastructure, schools, and civic places are at the last of the list. Same way with at the top, what should we focus on more? Greater community events, activities, and outdoor recreation are at the end. What would you like to see more of? Number 2, community facilities, recreation centers. So we're kind of balancing out those two charts. So when they come up with another survey, Are they going to try to, I don't want to, you know what I mean, there's a certain way, you don't want to drive somebody to an answer, but maybe relook at how they're asking the questions?
We do. I mean, we may try and get some more pointed responses. For all the people that said they don't want to consider change in Oak Harbor because of all, I mean, is that something that we can even consider, right? I mean, we can take those responses, but we have no choice. We are going to deal with change. So the question is, how do we best deal with it? So in looking at these responses, we can have some takeaways, you know, in where they responded that they like to see community or a neighborhood commercial and coffee shops and so on. That gives us a chance to consider policies for commercial nodes in neighborhoods and things like that we can say is now supported by the community because they are accepting of those concepts, even if they don't specifically say where it is. That's one of the concepts that they want to see more of, you know. And so even though there are opposing or contradicting messages in this, like I said, you know, when it comes time to make, you know, policy decisions, we can always come back to the survey to tell us or to support us in a certain direction that we want to go.
Okay, thank you. I got two more things real quick. So like you were saying, trying to keep people that grew up in Oak Harbor to stay in Oak Harbor so that they don't move away. And I think you kind of touched it with having the housing at that medium level, because I have a son that's a little bit older than should be moved out. Well, he moved out, now he's back because it's too expensive. But knowing him and his friends, that age group, as they're trying to move away from mom and dad's house, they're not looking in Oak Harbor. They're looking out past Mount Vernon, you know, out that way far. You know, they're trying to stay close to home, but they can't afford it up here. And if we don't do something about that type of housing, you'll never get people to stay in Oak Harbor.
Absolutely. I think I have to agree with you. I think with the housing pressure that we see for the next 20 years, I would say that 80% of the development is going to be in multifamily development. That's the only way we're going to actually get to our capacity. And that is not the percentage we have seen in the last 10 years. So our development will change over the next 20 years, and hopefully will provide variety in housing options for people like you mentioned, like your son and other similar young adults that want opportunities here.
And then kind of along that same lines, you had talked about short-term and long-term rentals. What is the definition of a short-term and a long-term as far as the consultants are looking at it?
I'm not sure if we have defined that really clearly in terms of what's a short-term and what's a long-term. Do you know, David?
Yes, the short-term rental is defined as 30 days or less. And anything more than that is considered a long-term rental.
Okay, thank you. And then one last thing, and then I'll shut up. So when they talked about environmental concerns, the first concern on the climate-related concerns was wildfires. Was the concern wildfires here in Oak Harbor, or are they concerned about wildfires where the air quality is affected, like Canada's on fire and we get the smoke as it blows south? Did you know which? Did they differentiate what they're concerned with that?
Our question did not differentiate that, but I'm suspecting, if I have to read into it, that it's just a general effect of the climate change that we're feeling because of wildfires, whether it's local or whether it's in the associated region. I'm not sure if we've had a local wildfire in the time that I've been here, right?
Right, and that if they're concerned about the air quality from smoke from Canada and things like that coming this way, there's probably not a whole lot us as Oak Harbor can do about that to alleviate some of that concern that they have.
Absolutely.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what the concern was. I mean, if we were in eastern Washington and wildfire was a concern and we had actual incidents of wildfire, then we'd have policies and codes like they do. You know, if you see, go to the eastern Washington, you see metal roofs or you see not much trees around structures, you know. So they have done policies and regulations to make sure that fires don't spread easily or structures don't get damaged because of the building code. I don't think we have those type of direct related issues. I think the question just brought out the climate change hazards that people have on their minds, and that's what they've noted in the survey.
Okay, thank you very much.
Except we have had major issues with smoke
Yes, we
coming
have.
from British Columbia. And one thing that the city could do, an awful lot of the apartments and condos in Oak Harbor do not allow people to put in air conditioning. And I know this because I had to fight it through HUD to get it, and that's because I'm an asthmatic. And I really don't, I mean, we require them to have heaters, right? And we know what the temperature, of course, our temperature isn't as bad as most people's, but still in all, the fact that they can say, no, you can't do that bothers me.
Was it, do you know if it was the building or is it just the apartment folks? I mean,
It was actually back in, what do they call them, the condo description that starts, you know, when they build the condo? Yes, the covenant.
oh, the
That-
covenant.
And it said, it actually said all you could have for heating was baseboard heating because that's what they put in,
Actually,
which is the most expensive thing there is.
yeah. So covenants are usually imposed by the developer on themselves. And I'm just guessing that window units is just something that they thought was a attractive nuisance, maybe?
It wasn't just window units. I was putting in ductless heating
Okay,
and air,
listen.
and they weren't going to allow that either.
That's it.
It took me 6 months to get it through. And nobody else has followed me on that, which surprised me greatly. But you know, if we're going to have more wildfires, it's going to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, binding site plans and condominiums have covenants such as what you were talking about. And I'm not 100% positive, but I think there are some RCWs and WACs that have been recently adopted that gives now the city the ability to look into those covenants to make sure that they're not
Yes.
restricting things that
You
are
know, like the
normally
racist
there.
ones from the past? Yes.
Yes, yeah. So before, I don't think the cities looked into those. They had their own codes, and anybody's allowed to do whatever the code allows, but your covenants can be stricter, not more relaxed than the code. But they're finding out that some of these covenants are also restricting, you know, ADUs and other addition units that's preventing capacity. And so these are documents that are written and recorded that are hard to change from a public standpoint. And so I don't know if they were considering WACs and RCWs to kind of nullify some of these old covenants, but I'm not entirely sure what the status of that is.
Anyway.
Anything else?
Yeah. One of the things that leaped out at me in the responses, one person mentioned rent control. It is not something we've talked about when we've talked about incentives and the like, you know, on taxes. But I've got to say, I mean, consider what New York City would be like without rent control. It would not have the range of ages that it has or incomes. It could make a big difference. I don't know how it ought to be instituted. I'm just saying that.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, I mean, that one comment, you know, it maybe is not, doesn't have to be stated 100 times, but it felt like it made sense to people. And so we want to hear those type of comments. What is the hidden ideas in all of these 100 ideas that we have that we can actually work with? So rent control is something that we did hear of even in the OPAC meeting, how to keep things affordable in the renting world. I am not entirely 100% sure of all the tools that a city has in terms, unless they are part and parcel of the housing development somehow to influence this. Or it may come through MFTE programs that the city has if a building, if a development is in one of those zones and if we have restrictions. But definitely something that has been raised at the Planning Commission and at the OPAC level, and we'll definitely include it in our policies and in our housing element. How it gets implemented, I am not entirely sure of, but I'm sure there are people who know how to implement that. So.
Well, one of the other things that came up on that is, and I did see it somewhere in there, we have lots of multifamily, well, of the multifamily housing that we have that is not being well maintained by its owners/managers. Yet, they are charging huge rents. There's one near me that's charging $2,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, and the place it's fallen down. It's got rust all over it and everything else because it has a water view. And I don't know what the city can do about managers and owners like that, but it's not just, I mean, some people have said it's the Navy BAH that's driving up the rental housing costs. That's not all there is to it. There are some people who have gotten real greedy, and I know that was mentioned.
Yeah, and then that could just be because of the demand and the lack of housing, right? I mean, I hope that with the supply of housing, that there will be an adjustment in terms of the rent rate. So if you have some newer apartments that are offering some competitive rents, then some of these other buildings will have to do. So we can let the market do some adjustment that is not necessarily city controlled, but some of the things to consider as we move forward.
Are you going to say something? Go ahead.
But the rent piece, owners ain't gonna draw rent back as long as somebody's still paying for it, and they're in a contract, right? You sign a contract, and you're usually in there for a year or 6 months, or however long you signed it for. As we build more of these, yeah, there's gonna be more out there, but they're brand-new facilities. They're not gonna put them out there for $1,000 a month. So we're not building it for those people that need that $1,000 a month rent. We're still building new units, and they're gonna wanna get their money back so they can pay their bills. And part of it would be the income level for the people that need that. We all have kids that are in all sorts of different levels, and that's who I'm worried about. Most of us, as we get older and then go into retirement, then we're on a fixed income. Until we actually put a stop to it, and the piece about the BAH you was talking about is the BAH goes up because of last year's rent prices. So the BAH comes up to match last year's rent prices. And I think I'm saying this right, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. This is the way it used to work. And now they raise the BAH. So now all of a sudden, people who have apartments say, oh, their BAH went up, so they raised the price up.
They do.
And it's based on the rent. So now it keeps going up, and they're feeding one another. And we got to stop that, because I can't speak on behalf of the Navy, but I can tell you that a lot of the people that I talk to don't live here because they can't afford it. Like you said, they're going to Mount Vernon, they're going to Burlington, and to other areas, Cedro-Woolley, Concrete. Some people still drive way down south daily, 3 hours one way a day. So, because it's cheaper for them on the outskirts than it is for them to live here where they actually work. And that's, you know this, CAC, we've already talked about it, so I'm not going to beat the drum, but I think that we got to some way figure out, and I think you hit it on the head when you said rent control. I don't want to put that, because that's somebody's business. But at some point, we got to say, you're robbing our citizens at some point. And I know inflation's gone up. We all feel it. But their mortgage didn't go up unless they refinanced for some reason, maybe to take out a loan. And if they did, then they need to be putting that money back in them apartments, because so many, and I know y'all drive through this town, so many of these apartment complexes, and I'm not going to name them over the air, but I can talk to you about it afterwards, are dives. Dives. And we got to have some type of city code that covers that. I mean, that's just, it's not right. And for the amount that they're charging, you better have an in-ground indoor heated swimming pool and gold faucets. Just my take. Sorry, I'll get off my rant.
Absolutely.
We're
no.
on the same soapbox, it's okay.
So we're kind of in a unique scenario when it comes to the BAH because such a large percentage of our population here in Oak Harbor is military or connected to the military. You'd go someplace a little bit farther south that's a little bit bigger. Obviously, Everett has probably more sailors than we do up here, but their population is bigger, so that the BAH doesn't affect their rent as much. And so I don't know how you would ever, you create that perpetual, hey, the BAH goes up to match last year's rent. The tenants, the landlords or whatever say, oh, okay, so we can charge more, and it just keeps going up. Unless we have a huge influx of new people that come in to where that military presence in the BAH is a smaller percentage, it's always going to be that way, I think, in Oak Harbor. I don't know how to get around that.
I'm also not sure if places are more affordable far away from here, actually. I mean, I live in Mount Vernon, and it is not necessarily more affordable in here, and Cedar Woolley and other jurisdictions are not necessarily. I think people live in some of these areas because it may be more affordable as a family and services available for one person to maybe commute here, then the whole family live here and having them to commute for services elsewhere. So those are the challenges I think people take on in terms of affordability, but I think housing, I don't think is affordable elsewhere. It really is in par or even more, actually. Actually, housing from a housing value, like house value standpoint, Oak Harbor's on the lower side in Western Washington. So it doesn't make sense. I mean, I would think it's the other way around. People want affordable housing. They can live on the island, beautiful scenery, and commute to Mount Vernon. That would make more sense. But it's not that way because there's different reasons why I think people live off island, and affordability is not necessarily the top reason.
Availability is the other one.
Well, that may be the case, but I think
We just don't have enough.
I think that as we move forward with housing elements and that type of thing, it would be really useful to know, right, those sort of median housing prices and rent prices more broadly than just here. If we have some sort of that comparison to Anacortes or Mount Vernon or further afield, so that we can sort of dive into that to think more about
I
what
think
those sources are.
when we did our housing, we did a housing action plan, and I think that plan that was done a couple of years ago looked at some of the housing values in our neighborhood jurisdiction, Anacortes and Mount Vernon and Arlington and similar-sized communities to compare. And I think that's where I got most of that information from. Also, I was looking for a home 5 years ago when I was living here in Oak Harbor. I mean, I love living on the island, wanted to always work. Family situation, I had to move out of town, and looking at buying similar houses in the area, I mean, everything is more expensive than Oak Harbor for the same house that you want here. You're looking elsewhere, everywhere else is expensive, more than Oak Harbor is. Relatively, there's like a $20,000, $30,000 to $50,000 difference in terms of a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house here in Oak Harbor versus a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom elsewhere on the mainland. So.
Yeah, but I don't want us to just look at the military, though, because the military gets BAH, but our local citizens who aren't military, they don't get BAH, so they're making that much less. And not to take away from the military, because I'm retired myself, but we got to look at our public folks too. So that's one of the keys, keeping the military in mind as well, because we want them here. It's one big team. So, but yeah.
Well, one thing, since you've got a Navy representative on the OPAC, right? So the Navy made a decision that they were not going to go into any more private developments for Navy housing, you know, that they had enough. Clearly, they don't have enough, or all these junior sailors wouldn't be having such a terribly hard time. I wonder if the Navy could help us out. If they had more Navy housing, it would make a difference. When I taught over there at Crescent Harbor, we had the 1940s houses on one side of us. The people who went into those were the ones that had 4 to 6 children and multiple dogs, because they couldn't find any place to do that. And so, you know, people make the decisions that they need to for them, but I'm not sure that the Navy's, at one time, the Navy was going to close the base. That hasn't happened, and they have added more people, correct?
So that's the kind of funny thing with the Navy. So if the Navy squadrons, number of squadrons are increasing, which we knew would happen in 2017, 2018, then we account for that, or we consider that into our growth-related issues and so on, and make sure that we have enough housing. So with this update, the Navy has said they're not increasing any of their squadrons. However, our population is destined to increase because Island County is, so from the Navy standpoint, from their perspective, even though Oak Harbor's population is growing, their operations and their squadrons are not increasing. If they are, then they would let us know. We're getting 1 more squadron, we're getting 2 more squadrons. In 2016, we had planned for 500 or 600 extra, officers and so on. They had a breakdown for us to consider. So we took that into account when we did the forecast and tried to accommodate for that. This time they're not doing that. So it's hard to say, okay, we're just generally increasing population and the base should increase it. So they have their own analysis in terms of how much housing they need to provide for their operation as opposed to Oak Harbor's need. So currently they don't have any increases they're planning for. Therefore, I think they're building some, but they're building it to replace what they demolished, I think, at the outfield a few years ago. I think they took down the barracks there, I think, and so they're going to rebuild some of it there, and so they're kind of replacing some housing in the next couple of years or so, but they are not planning for any increase.
Okay. Can I bring up my real thing? Okay, so I heard what you said about why you left in the 74 comments from outside the city boundaries, but I don't agree. And I think that it skewed all of those responses terribly. I mean, I looked through all of that and I could go, these things I can get out of the Whidbey News-Times, just looking at the letters that come in. So there was a lot of, kick the Navy out, the Navy's the problem, the homeless, that's the problem. I'm not saying there aren't any problems. I'm saying that they just tag on to those. And what happened was that all those people outside the city, are they the ones who made infrastructure, the roads in particular, a really big deal? Because they have to go through Oak Harbor to get to their house. And so I'm not saying that the rest of us don't care. I'm saying that it skewed things. So would it make sense to at least have theirs separate?
Surveys are challenging in terms of what it is and how it is that we want to draw information out of. If we find later in our policy discussion that that'll be helpful, we can invest more time in dealing with survey data. The survey data is vast. The amount of correlations and the questions you can ask is vast. And so you can keep on asking and getting. Right. So we have to measure what we want to get out of it, if there's any specific things we want out of it. So if there's a general concern that we should consider these differently, then staff will definitely look at it. And so sometimes I wish surveys are so difficult. Some people, some communities or some organizations or consultants groups are set very specifically to do only community surveys. And so they have a vast variety of tools that they can use to determine what the results can say, and so on. In surveys such as for communities and things like that, we don't use those extended services just because they're expensive and they're time consuming, and the amount of data that you can try to get out of it is vast over a period of time. So today we may have 3 questions for the same numbers, and a year from now we may have 3 very different questions we want, and we can ask all of it. So it's hard to get a consensus on this data is okay, this data is not okay. Even from staff level, we raise a lot of questions. What is ethically right here to do, and what is the so these are the said we're just going to keep this intact as is right now, as we got it, and as we go further, if we get more and more concerns, or if we have more and more questions on certain correlations, then we'll dive into that aspect and pull more information out. And that's kind of why I said it's hard to just say we get 3 takeaways from the survey and that's all we do. We move on and don't look at the survey again. I think there's a lot of information in the survey that we can come back to and discuss a year or 2 years from now, even as we're going through development regulation changes or other changes, sub-area plans, et cetera.
But I'd hope you'd look to see whether it's those of us who live in Oak Harbor who said those things versus those who are making $100,000 and live south of here.
We have requested the database from the consultants on all the surveys, so that we don't have to have the consultants do analysis of the data. So we have requested the data so that we, as staff, can look at the data a little more closely with respect to things that you're thinking about. So that's why we're still continuing to look at that data. The analysis of the survey data is not complete with this presentation. We just wanted to share this with you just as this is what we're looking at, this is what we want to share with you. You can look at it and infer your own takeaways from that, but we'll continue to be looking at that as well.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? Once, twice, 3 times. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay. Yes, our next item is discussing our December Planning Commission meeting schedule with Director Dave Cool.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you remember, CAC was talking earlier tonight about the December workload and a lot of the background work we have to do. Working with the county, working with our consultants, trying to get comprehensive planning ready, trying to get survey data ready, trying to work on a number of other projects we're doing. We're actually setting up a lot of steering committees for next year, economic development being one, and we're hiring a economic development consultant to help us with that process. So we have a number of things going on, and the holidays come around every year, and so we are asking for you to consider canceling the December meeting, and behind the scenes we'll continue to do our jobs and be ready for our meeting in January. As you know, coming up in January, we have the annual report that I do, which is based on our projects we've accomplished as well as ones coming up. And I present that to the City Council, I believe, in January, and then Planning Commission maybe in February. But it's all tied together. So we have a lot of things happening right now, and we're just requesting a postponement, or I should say a cancellation of the December meeting. So it's all yours.
Okay. Any thoughts about that?
I make a motion that we cancel the December meeting.
Second.
Moved by Fry, second by Bradley. All those in favor? Okay, motion passes,
you.
canceling our December 10th, 2024 meeting. Okay, so our next item is general member comments. So if anyone has anything beyond what they've said, go for it. Start.
So our meetings in January, are they back to the normal times? Okay.
Correct. Our next scheduled meeting will be January 28th, 2025. Cool. Any other comments?
Somebody needs to tell the people who want to hear, they want to just notice what's
Okay. Sounds good. So our next meeting will be January 28th, 2025. We'll make sure that our absent folks know that. Otherwise, we'll see you all next year. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Fry, second by Gore. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Happy